So as Anne mentioned, I grew up here. I am a proud Jaguar. The funny part is, back in the mid '90s, there was no development over there. They were just starting to build the first rows of houses, so it was a very different environment. But I left to go to college. I went to George Washington University. Had my sights on the big city, arrived and was like, oh my goodness, what just happened? I went from being a big fish in a small pond to a complete nobody in the land of fast-moving everything. But, insert whatever cliche, when life's challenges face you, you find a way to overcome them, and being there was the best thing I could have done. I ended up, like most probable college freshmen, didn't know what I wanted to be when I grew up. Ended up getting a degree in political science, and straight after, upon graduating, I joined the Dean campaign way back in 2003 as a field organizer. So drove up with all of my things in my car, and the political campaigns are the best on-the-job experience anybody could ever get. So if you've got friends, kids who are graduating, or friends of friends, or anything, who are like, what do? I don't know, go get that high-paying job, go do this, go do that. The thing about a campaign is because you are on a time frame, right? You're resource constrained and you're time constrained. And so you learn a little bit about everything. You've got to do a little bit of everything. And you also learn group dynamics. So I was a 21-year-old, managing a team of 8 people, running an entire office, way outside any sort of, any amount of work that any other organization would let you do at that stage in your career, right? But it's sink or swim. You do it or you don't, and then it's over. I saw the 2004 campaign while I worked for the DNC for Kerry. It was really important to me that, even though my primary candidate had lost, it was really important to see it through. From there, after that, I was very clear that my next job, I wanted to work in a hierarchical organization, right? So coming out of the campaign, I was like, I need somebody to put me in a lane and tell me where to go, what to do. I want to try that, right? I've done this one crazy often. So I did a little bit of work at a consulting firm, and then I will fast forward through, spent some time in Montana working for the state insurance commissioner. And then in 2007, my then boyfriend, now husband, and I were trying to figure out if we were going to jump back in on any crazy presidential campaign or not. He had been running Senator John Tester's campaign for Senate in 2006. And we were like, well, we're either going to both do it or we won't, or neither do it, because you can't have one person on a campaign and one not. So in March of 2007, we packed up all our stuff once again, moved to New Hampshire for my second time. I'm a glutton for punishment. And so from March of 2007 until November of 2008, I had the honor, privilege, and pleasure of working for Senator Barack Obama. I worked in New Hampshire. I was part of his political operation, focusing on health, on the policy side, on healthcare and the environment. And then traveled to a bunch of different states, ended up as the Oregon State Director. And so we, at the end of that, we were like, okay, now we're really done with campaigns. You'll see a theme here. We're really always done with everything. We're gonna, set up life in Portland, Oregon. This is, whether we win or we lose, this is our life now. So as all good plans go, 2 days, Obama won, yay, we were all very elated. We got a call 3 days later asking if we'd come work on the transition. Not a call you turn down. Yeah. So we left our apartment in Portland, moved, flew back to DC. We're living in my friend's basement apartment, not knowing what would come. I mean, the transition was still a short-term thing. Nothing was assured or otherwise. And because of my work on health policy during the campaign, I was assigned to work with the HHS, the Department of Health and Human Services transition operation. as luck would have it, that the person who was running that operation was then named to be deputy secretary. His name is Bill Core. He has a long record of nonprofit and Hill work in DC. One of the best people on the planet, and so we worked together for those 6 weeks, or who knows, whatever that was, before the inauguration. And right before that, he said, you know, there's a million jobs. You know, we're all trying to figure out: do we have jobs? Do we not have jobs? Thousands of people want jobs. He said, well, I don't know. You could do a million things. Why don't you just come along with me? We'll figure it out from there. So nice. I started I was on January 21st, the day after the inauguration. There were 10 people that walked into the Department of Health and Human Services, the first 10 political appointees. I was the one junior staff. There were 9 very, very senior people. I figured I'd be there a year, 2 years, again, the theme. I was there till the very last day of the Obama administration. So I grew from being the special assistant to the deputy secretary, to this man, Bill Core, to his chief of staff. And then when he left in 2015, I helped transition the second deputy. So I was there through the transition from, there were 2 secretaries during that time. It was Kathleen Sebelius, who was there through, I think, 14, and then Sylvia Burwell. So I got to serve. I was one of a few folks who served through that transition, and then I stayed through the very end. In that time, I got married, bought a house, had 2 kids, so I will get into some of the work side of that, the sort of biography part of it. You know, we figured, okay, we're gonna, you know, DC's our home. We have a house. We have a great community. We've got these 2 kids. So first 4 months of unemployment. Right now we're fast forward January of 2016, 17. The first 4 months of employment were delightful. There were yoga classes. There was just some decompressing. There was a sense of like what had been accomplished, what hadn't. But the world was frozen. So we all left thinking like, oh, we have this great experience. We have all these great contacts. Getting a job's going to be no problem, right? Like, who wouldn't want to hire somebody who's just done all this stuff? Well, DC's a company town, and when the company changes, and in the fashion that it did, the dramatic fashion, it was like a complete standstill. So all of a sudden, I was interviewing for jobs with people who had 20 years experience, 30 years experience. So the whole sort of paradigm shifted. I spent about 6 months looking for work, great interviews, second interviews, and then things not working out. And so by August of 2017, my husband and I were kind of looking at each other like, okay, what's going to happen? What's our game plan? He does political work, and he got an offer to come run the Nevada governor's race, which was something he'd wanted to do for a long time. And all of a sudden we were like, why are we trying to make DC work? Why don't we move home to Santa Fe? My family's still here. My sister had just moved back. I can sort of, I'll have help with the kids, and he can commute back and forth. So we did it. So in October of 2017, about 18 years after I had left, we came back home. That was not part of the plan. I never really could figure out what I would do here. How would that work? Obviously, life, kids, changes things. So I was enjoying life. I found a part-time job working from home. I was working for a small little nonprofit that's goal is to help connect our local organizations to federal money. So as you guys, there is just an amazing amount of federal money that gets left on the table here in New Mexico because we don't have the capacity, we don't have the right organizational structure to figure out how to find that money. So this little nonprofit felt like a perfect fit. I was excited to sort of dive in. Me being me, also then started, the mayor's race was starting to pick up. I volunteered a couple times because that's part of what I do. And fast forward, Mayor Weber got elected in March of 2018, and he asked me if I'd be willing to come on and be his chief of staff, join the city. And for me, that was sort of like, wow, this is not even something I'd ever conceptualized as even an opportunity that I could do. You know, I figured when we moved back home that I was leaving the work that I'd done, that part of my career behind, because those sorts of opportunities don't exist in other places than DC. And so to be faced with an opportunity to be able to help, impact my city, do what I know how to do, which is working within, bureaucracies to get things done. I couldn't say no. My husband was still commuting at the time to do his political work in Nevada, so we scrambled quick for some childcare, and I joined like a week after the mayor started. And it's been a wild ride ever since. So I served, as Ann mentioned, 1.5 years in the chief of staff role, and then when Eric Litzenberg, our then city manager, announced he was leaving, I stepped in as interim, and I reluctantly stepped in as interim, and then I reluctantly applied for the job. And the reluctant piece, I think, is important because it was actually the best thing I could have done. But it was not of my own choice. So of course I'm sitting there thinking, well, there's got to be somebody better. Like, let's find the right person who knows more, who has more experience. That would be, that looks like a really hard job. We should really find the right person. The important lesson in that for me, and hopefully for others everywhere, is that it's not always as scary once you're there. It's often a lot scarier looking from the outside in, and it's like, oh God, that seems not something I can do. When I stepped into the position, it was like, oh, I can do this. Like, yes, it's really hard. Yes, there are a lot of things that I haven't solved that may not get solved, but it's not intimidating or scary in a way that, and I think that's something that holds a lot of people back, especially women, especially younger women coming up through the ranks. And so for me, it's been really important to sort of vocalize that and talk about that, because when, it does make a difference when you're only used to seeing sort of a certain type of person in a position, and then you see somebody else. I think that's really important to acknowledge. And so again, we went through the same thing. The search for the city manager, I'm like, let's find somebody amazing who brings a different level of experience. I'd love to learn from somebody, work for somebody. And ultimately what that yielded was my relationship with the team that we had built. My relationship with the mayor was, and that ability to have that level of continuity was actually really important and valuable for where we are in this moment. And so, as you guys know, and I'll remind you, 2018, Mayor Weber is the first full-time mayor in the city of Santa Fe. 2018, first full-time mayor. And so what that means is that changes the whole dynamic. So we are in the very beginnings of operationalizing the changes that were made over the last decade. And so, there's fits and starts. How does it work? Who does what? But it's a really interesting moment. It's a moment of a lot of change, a lot of transition. These last 2 years, I think, have been really, really hard on the bureaucracy of the organization, right? Part of the reason this mayor was elected was because people were fed up with the way things are working, right? The city is an easy punching bag, right? It doesn't work fast enough, it doesn't work smart enough. It is all of the things. And so part of what we've done is intentionally tried to break some of these things, right? Because if it's not working, how do you make it better? But we're 2 years in, and so to have another transition on top of that would not have been a productive piece. So I'm 4 weeks, something into my official role. I'm still standing. And the thing about the city manager job is that it's a really interesting, you do a little bit of everything, a little bit of everything to everyone, much like the role of the city. I view this role as really, part of what happens is the city is a little bit of a whirling dervish, right? There's a lot of energy, there's a lot of chaos. My intention, my role is to help kind of bring the drama down a little bit, because any problem that comes to me means it hasn't been solved by somebody else, right? So it's everybody else's top problem or priority, but they're all like that for me. So the job of a leader is to not increase that level of agita and be like, oh my God, the world's falling apart, how do we handle this? It's like, okay, so what are the factors, who's involved, how do we, and so when you can sort of have that level of steady leadership, I think that slowly but starts to cascade through the organization. It also starts to empower the department directors and other leadership to make decisions. So part of what's happened over time, again, you have 8 city council members, you have a city manager, and before us you had a part-time mayor. So the city manager has 9 bosses. That's a hard position. And so decisions were made sometimes because that's just what you do. And so starting to build some continuity, right, and to empower folks to make decisions, and that I've got their back, but that doesn't, right now everything comes to the city manager, because then there's one point of accountability. I'm trying to sort of reestablish some roles so that I'm consulted, I'm the ultimate decision maker. That's absolutely remains the case. But others are empowered, because that you all have worked in, that's the strength of the organization. It's not the one person at the top, because that comes and goes. It's the resiliency at the different layers that needs to be built out, and that's something the city has really never had the luxury of investing in. It's not that they didn't want to or couldn't, but when you're always cash strapped, you're also, you don't have the time to build capacity. It's crisis driven. So we're starting to try to turn that around. So that's my sort of philosophy of the job. I am conscious of time. I'm happy to talk about a couple of key things or take questions and answers, however you want to handle it.
What are the key things?
Sure, absolutely. Absolutely. Well, so I think some of the ones Anne mentioned, of course, the Midtown redevelopment, that is a huge, that will be a huge legacy of this administration. Of course, this has been going on for a very long time. The city purchased the land in 2009. So here we are 10 years later, and things are actually starting to happen. But it's a really exciting process, and I think it's something that, again, we seem to have a number of once-in-a-lifetime opportunities right now, and how you manage all of them is always a challenge. But ultimately, the decision was made by the governing body to move forward on figuring out how to work with a master developer. So after all of the lessons learned around the rail yard and what that development looked like, good, bad, or otherwise, everybody's got an opinion, that this 65-acre spot is way bigger than anything that the city itself can develop. That's just that's not in the cards. So we've been going through this what's called an RFEI process, a request for expressions of interest, and that is specifically not an RFP, which says, come give us your best project and we'll take it hook, line, and sinker. This says, what are the components you want to see in it, and then it allows for the city to continue to have impact, negotiations around what that looks like. But it's built on on key components as laid out by the governing body: a dedication to education, film and digital, entertainment, media, and housing. And so those are the 3 lines that will move through whichever master developer is chosen. And I think the thing that's really important to remember, this will be a long process. Like, we're already 10 years in. We're in this. There's been more activity in these last 2 years. We're about to see it pick up even more. But this is a chance. Any other city, no other city has an opportunity to develop 65 acres in the middle of their town, their city. So it's a real chance for us to also push, find the balance between what can be and what sort of then we're willing to accept. And I think part of the partnership with a master developer is it allows us to really think big and see what, there's a tendency to just assume like, oh, well, it's a campus, so then if you work within what the parameters of this building are, but what if you reimagined it as open city blocks, right? There's a whole different way to think about it. So that's a huge piece. It ties, oh, go ahead.
Could you remind me again where the 65 acres
Yes,
are?
the former College of Santa Fe, the Santa Fe Art and Design. Yeah. Yeah. So that ties then into our second major external priority, which is housing. Obviously, the city is facing an extreme glut of housing, any number from 4,000 to 5,000 units that we're short. What you'll see around town when you drive around is that's changing. You'll see a lot of new buildings, a lot of new development. What's interesting, if you look at it sort of across a continuum, we were late to go into the recession in 2008, and we were late to come out of it. So here we are 10 years later, and we're still on the upswing. I think, again, all of these external projects dovetail with the need for internal capacity and organization. I think one of the main digs against the city is a complete, not exactly the most efficient, not exactly the most customer friendly. The mayor, when he came in, is really committed to making our city the most customer friendly, service-oriented city. And so you've seen the processes in our land use department turn around completely, right? Everything from basic things like adding more people into the front counter. The big piece, and again, the city it's very easy for the city to become everyone's punching bag. When you're inside, you can kind of see a different angle. One of the biggest internal projects that doesn't really get any attention, nor really should it, is that the city has embarked in the last number of years, but specifically the last two, on a internal, it's called an ERP system, but basically it's our internal computer. The city is still running on 25-year-old software systems.
Oh,
so the capacity, that it all goes together, right? So when you're working on a black screen with green letters, the functionality is just not there. So one of the things we've done is implement this. So that's really hard, right?
Is that the one from Tyler Technologies?
That's right.
Okay.
Yes.
All right.
Yes. So we've got Tyler Technologies. It's got a couple different modules. The land use one is called EnerGov.
Yeah.
You saw an article today about business licensing. But we're still in that point. Every rock you turn under, there are 3 or 4 or 5 rocks underneath that rock, right? And that's just the way it's gonna. Change is hard. Change takes a long time, and it especially takes a long time in a bureaucracy and in a local municipality that has never really been supported in any sort of consistent or meaningful way. So that level, so there's this internal capacity that's happening, while then you've got all these big external big external issues coming around. So I say that partly to keep in mind too, when there's a sort of knee-jerk reaction to be like, oh, well, what did the city do now? Sometimes there's a reason, sometimes there's not, sometimes it's just a mistake. But again, it's partly, we also, I think one of the interesting pieces, conversations I'd like to have with you guys, one of the things the city does not do a good job of is telling its story. And again, partly as a function of that's never been a goal or a priority, because you just do your job. I think of it in terms of, last year we had a couple of snowstorms like right back to back, and we were like, we said, okay, well, can you guys take a picture of yourself? Can we do a Facebook Live showing that you're on the where we are on the road so we can communicate? And there was no pushback, but the mental shift that was like, well, why would you want me to talk, right? Why? That's not my job. Not that's not my job, but that's like not how people think about their work, right? They're just like, I am here to plow the streets, and we're saying, help us help you, right? Like when we can say, over and over again, Cerritos and St. Mike's and St. Francis are the state's roads. We don't plow those, we plow these ones. But when you put a face to it, it changes the dynamic. It's not just a bureaucracy saying like, no, we don't do this. This is not our lane. This is your lane. there's a reason behind it. And so that's one of the things we've been working really hard, and it's a work in progress. I mean, it's not, we make 2 steps forward, 3 steps back across the board, but really, and again, I think there's also partly a generational shift, because the millennial workforce grew up talking about what they do. That's how they communicate. The rest don't or haven't, and so trying to find a balance between how we talk about what we're doing, putting faces to this work. I mean, that changes everything because, again, you guys, you all know on the social media side of it, when you're just an entity with no faces, it's a whole lot easier to blast it than when it's, oh, that's my friend's friend who runs that snowplow. Like, I know he's busting his butt. There's just a different, so that's, I think, a really important through line that we're focusing on. So those are some of the big, that's, I think, the mix of sort of, again, external projects, right, the really public-facing pieces, and then internally we have a huge opportunity and body of work to do around making the city an effective and efficient place and a fun place to work. Because that, again, right, like you get when it's a difficult place to work, then the folks who don't need to stay leave. When it's a fun place to work, then then you start to change that culture. So we're really in this midst of a culture shift, and trying to, again, like I said, my job is to both keep the tone level, to keep it out of crisis mode, and also create ways to empower all of our different levels of the organization. The last thing I'll say, because I've heard a couple of comments about it, is around the coronavirus. So during my time at HHS, I lived through a number of health pandemics. H1N1 hit actually my wedding weekend. We got married here, and a number of our friends were unable to come because they got pulled into White House stuff. So H1N1 and then Ebola. And I think what's really important to know, there's a couple competing factors in a global health pandemic. Obviously the dynamics right now are very different, but again, this need to sort of balance precaution and preparedness with keeping panic and over reaction at bay. So here, right now, so the important thing to know right now is that the Department of Health is the lead, or the lead operation on a public health pandemic of this nature here. It's really important to remember why a framework exists, right? So having looked at it at the federal level, you have an entire office who is designated and designed for this level of preparedness planning. They work with state affiliates, and then it trickles on down. For us, so it's really important from the city perspective to fit into that framework, because they know there's a path, there's a chain of command. We are a partner, but we are not going to be standing up our own sort of emergency operations center or anything like that, because that actually creates more confusion, mixed messages, and that's where you end up with confusion. Well, these people told me this, these guys said this. In these cases, there's a chain of command for a reason. So the Department of Health is the lead operator in our operation. We, the city, are a partner. So just, it's an important sort of understanding of, again, the players, because when you when things go out of that flow, we end up in messy situations. We are actively in communication with the Department of Health. We've participated on a number of their preparation conference calls. They've been running scenarios and exercises. But if and when there is a case reported in New Mexico, which there has not been yet, they will be the first to know. They alert us, and then we will take it from there. But again, there is a very fine balance between, of course, everybody keeping each other safe and not overreacting. So with that, why don't I?
We have do's and don'ts posted on our website too, along with the dashboard. 2 or 3 really good sites where the numbers are up to date.
Yeah, I think it's cv.doh.nm.gov or something like that. That's the Department of Health's website. They have a specific one for coronavirus. All right, we got a lot of questions.